to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I'm super excited and honored to have Mike Sharrow as our guest. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. We finally get to do this.
Yeah, I was going to say it's almost been a year when we first talked about having you here, and glad it's finally worked out.
Me too.
Just before the show, we were talking about a couple of different directions we might go. And I think let's go first to, can you share a story or a time when you had to lead through a crisis? What was involved in that? How the team respond? Any lessons learned in that process? And let's just unpack that.
Sure. The one that I was thinking about when you asked the question is one that we all kind of navigate in our own way. So this is my way of navigating it, was leading a business through the pandemic, through COVID. And I always tell people I was so excited about 2020. I thought my best strategic plan, my best budget, my best mapping of activity throughout the year, I felt really, really confident in how I'd mapped out that year. It was so precise, team clarity about where we're going, all that stuff. And I remember being at a board meeting at end of January, doing a risk analysis for my board, and them saying, what are the things on the horizon outside of the company that could disrupt us? And economy, technology. And number 10 on my list was this coronavirus in China. And I remember someone going, that's kind of an obscure thing to put on the top 10 list of risks for the business. I mean, it's in China. And I was like, yeah, but it could disrupt trade. And if it was spread much more, maybe like bird flu, maybe that would actually really disrupt the economy of the U.S. And so I think it should be on our radar. And famous last words, someone went, technically, yes, but I don't think we're really going to worry about our business being disrupted by a flu in China. And then, 4 weeks later, everything's changing. And so when you run a business that's based upon getting people in groups of 12, ideally, and it becomes a federal crime to gather in groups of 10, that kind of challenges your business model.
Yeah.
And there was that period where this is just a bad week. It's going to pass. In fact, my team was even going, do we cancel? You remember, are we going to cancel our big event in Dallas? I was like, no, we're not canceling our event in Dallas. Of course we're still going to do the event 2 weeks out.
That's like 3 weeks away.
Yeah, 3 weeks away. Like it's absolutely happening. Absolutely happening. And then get the notice, the city of Dallas has shut down all events like that. Like legally, it is not happening. Hey, the mayor just put out a shutdown notice. Hey, the world's going on lockdown. And that kind of like, oh, this is happening. And so that was a pretty defining moment where in that spot, you had kind of short time to process which path you're going to take, like survive, cry, or in our case, we said this moment going, gosh, we have no idea if this is going to last for a week, a month, a year, a decade. Is this a new ice age coming? But our mission isn't changed. So how do we serve in this? And so it became this moment rally cry to the team of, I'm a big believer you can either be a victim of circumstances or you can be a creator. And I believe God created us to create. And so even though we didn't know what to create, we went, we're called to still fulfill our mission. And this is now a challenge, not an oppression of what we do. And so it became this big rally. And it also became an interesting test for me and God. I was only about a year or two into really practicing Sabbath in a true way. I always kind of dabbled in it. And that unleashed like just crazy days of, inbox blowing up calls. What do we do? Where do we go next?
If you're going to ever be tempted to break Sabbath, this is the time to do it, right?
So I was driving home at the end of that week where we said, we're not shutting down. I reached out to the mayor. I actually did a respectful plea and said, hey, I know what your ordinance edict is, but our business supports entrepreneurs all around the world. Would you please grant us an exception? And by God's grace, he issued an exception that within 24 hours, one of the few that got him in the city. And so I told the team, hey, we're going to still rally. We're going to figure these things out. We're going to adopt technology and innovation, all this kind of stuff. I remember driving home what would be the beginning of my Sabbath, preparing in my head how I'm going to tell Jackie why we're not going to have a Sabbath and why I'm not going to take the day off. I'm sitting in my driveway, staring at the garage door, and I literally sensed God in this fatherly way kind of like put his hand on my back and go, hey, you can choose to do that. You can say the world's ending and you just got to hold it all together. I'll be okay. God's like, yeah, I'll be fine. He's like, but you'll be doing it on your own. And I remember sitting there staring at the garage door being like, can I really navigate a pandemic pivot the company and take a Sabbath? Like, that's crazy. And God's like, you wouldn't be in charge of me. And it's like, but God, like, but do you understand? Like, this is, and I'm like, no, like, I'll be fine. Like, we're okay. You're my son. Like, it wasn't a righteousness, like,
Whichever way you want to go.
Just Sabbath is for you. And if you don't think you need it, go for it. And so I took that first Sabbath in March of 2020, and people emailing and calling and like, hey, what happened? You stopped responding. And I came back the next day and the world was still ending at the same pace it had been before.
Mm-hmm. The news was still bad.
News was still bad. It was not a bad dream. But I also had this peace like, okay, God's going to do something in this. We're going to walk through this together. Mm. And so, interestingly enough, we're going through culture studies right now. That was probably, that 3 months was the best time of employee engagement and unity, because we just rallied with this sense of, okay, what are we going to do? How do we, cash was going down. We're doing the classic, hey, in a few weeks, I'll issue paychecks for everybody, but if you could just not all cash them at the same time, that'd be great. My budget that was so beautiful, we did, we were doing 3 new versions every couple of weeks of, well, that ain't going to work, and that ain't going to work. But there was this, we are going to serve in this moment. Mm. And we don't know how the ending will be, but we're going to lean into it. And our whole mission grew during that time. Mm. And so it was learned a lot around the mindset you have walking into a crisis. I'd read Henry Cloud's book, The Boundary for Leaders. Mm-hmm. He talked about even the 08-09 crisis when, stock market's horrible and everyone's losing money. There were certain brokerages where people gained customers. There were stockbrokers who got new accounts. Mm-hmm. And he's like, why is it? Like, well, when the sky's falling everywhere, then it's not unfair. And how do you create value in that? And so you either choose to be a victim or you choose to go, hey, I'm going to stand up and we're going to serve in the middle of a storm. And so 2020 was a crystallizing experience of that for us.
Do you, the way you've described it, it sounded like by necessity you had to focus. You had to choose very narrowly.
Yes, with inadequate data on a crunch.
And in some ways, it was probably a gift which is difficult for guys like you and me. We appreciate data.
Absolutely.
Right? But you had to go, from what you've described so far, you had to go to the core of who you are and what you believe and focus very narrowly on those handful of things. Yep. Sabbath is non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. The team has to unite because we're not going to make it otherwise, right? Probably transparency went up, but from the sounds of it, like, hey, the checks are going to be issued, but it's pretty transparent for most companies, so it really, and that's what we heard at Global Leadership last week, right? Was this great leaders are able to focus. And it sounds like what you're describing is that not by choice, you had to focus.
Yeah, in retrospect, it's a cool case study. In the moment, it is this series of kind of like, what do you believe and do you live out of that? And I think the honesty of, part of leadership is believing something so deeply, and if you don't see how you're going to get there. And so there's lots of questions he also had no answers to. So people are like, well, if we do this, will we be okay? I don't know. Like, if we do this, will we not have to do layoffs, or will the mission grow? God did not give me that headline of here's where everything's going to be. We just knew the next step to take. And we're like, we're going to be faithful in the steps. And the steps don't guarantee us immunity or invincibility. But it will command blessing. And we know God will be leading us through that. And so there was this kind of freedom of taking just the right next step towards this determination to keep doing the mission we were assigned to do, even if we didn't know what the next curve was going to be. And that actually became kind of our strength in the time. Was a lot of the industry kind of pulled back and was just waiting to see, like, let's see where the weather goes. And we stepped into the storm, served leaders. You were in the middle of all that, and then began to be the go-to folks for navigating kind of a moment by moment, what is the current reality, to where even, the White House reached out and a bunch of things kind of bloomed just because we were standing up in the storm. And it was a powerful moment for me in the moment to be like, all you can do is rely upon your first principles And then in retrospect to go, that made all the difference. Like if we had waited, it wouldn't have worked.
Speaking of retrospect, what are some of the things that you and or your organization have kept that was birthed in that time? Anything come to mind?
Yeah. So it
obviously your resolve for Sabbath is
still
with strengthened, right?
Yeah. That got doubled down. It's like, well, if I can do it then, I can do it anytime.
Yeah.
It certainly accelerated our rate of adaptation, innovation. A bunch of the technology Band-Aids became technology permanent things. It led to how we, I got acutely aware with every line item of my budget in that process, and the team did. And you start doing things like, hey, you found a way to save $20. Great. You found a way. We're like, well, why wouldn't we just kind of approach each year's budget with that level of like, let's just go down to the studs and say, does what we did last year need to be done this next year? And it made us further keep looking at where, like, what are the risk factors that could come and how do we mitigate those pieces? We laughed about this flu being on the number 10 list, but the reality is we were also being casual about some of the 7, 8, 9 topics. And so doing some more stress testing and war gaming of the business that's become normal. I'd say for our size, we probably play more future orientation, more scenario-based kind of testing of our plans than many businesses would, just to know kind of what our leading indicators would be that would require an agility or a pivot play.
Was there anything that you felt like you gained or enjoyed during that season that's been lost? So I heard a ton of people during COVID say, I'm really enjoying the extra time with my family, or I don't miss the commute to work and back.
Sure.
Right? Anything like that you felt maybe has already waned just a couple of years later?
Yeah, it's funny. That December, things had gotten a little more calm. We knew what we were doing at that point, and the world hadn't ended. We're like, hey, this isn't the apocalypse. Did a Christmas dinner with my family, and I remember asking the girls, hey, like, how would you describe this year? And my youngest went, Dad, this is the best year ever. And I went, huh, that's not what I was thinking. But why would you? Not many would say that. Why would you say that, sweetie? And she said, well, think about it, Dad. You didn't travel. We played a lot of board games, took a lot of walks. And then her next point was really interesting as well. She said, and this has to be your favorite year, Dad, because we prayed more than ever about things, and God answered so many prayers. This has to be like the number one year for answered prayers. Doesn't that make it a great year, Dad? And I thought, what a great child perspective.
Yeah, out of the mouth of babes.
I was like, could we not have a year where I'm like desperately depending upon God? I was like, but then again, that's what made it so sweet. So I think she's right. I do think even the team, we were reflecting on this recently. Well, you don't want to live in an adrenal gland stress mode, like fear for your life. That's not healthy. It does bring focus. And there was actually, like, it was the highest. We took our culture survey in the middle of the pandemic, which was kind of a weird lab test. Everyone knew mission matters, my peers matter. Like, how do we work together and how do we make this thing keep working? And all the other kind of drama gets pushed away. And there was a refreshing clarity and focus that when you get back into good times, then sometimes all the civilian affairs, as Paul would say to Timothy, kind of bubble up and you can get distracted. So
do you think it's sustainable to keep that clarity and focus? I mean, without the adrenaline.
Without the adrenaline, yeah. It is possible. It requires constant pursuit. Yeah, it's kind of like when we were going through that process, people were like, man, everyone is so pro-change. Everyone is so willing to change. Well, change theory kind of goes out the window when there's an existential. When the platform's on fire, people are very open to what I got to do. When things are not on fire, then you got to actually sell change and lead change very differently. So I would say that was an unsustainable era of factors from a like change tolerance, clarity. In a normal environment, then it's okay. Now you got to lead harder. So I think in the crisis, it required a different mindset to lead in a way. Let's keep going in a steady state, peacetime, non-wartime environment. You just have to lead harder to keep that same kind of urgency.
How do you think the team, not your team, but just you influence a lot of businesses. You and your team influence a lot of businesses. 4,500 members, ish.
From your mouth to God's ears. Yes, about 4,200 right now.
All right.
It'll be there soon.
On your way to 4,500.
That's right.
Is it possible for the kinds of things you just shared can leaders keep some of the good things from COVID in today? Because like life's still crazy, right? There's still wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and tidal waves and all kinds of crazy stuff. Yep. And it doesn't feel like it's going to get any less crazy. The days of sanity that, 70 years of peace or whatever somebody recently referred to may be gone, for foreseeable future.
Someone said change will never be as slow as it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. So what might be some lessons learned or some application for what you were just sharing?
Yeah, I think through that time, it did create wakes and ripples across the global community of businesses, and frankly, our testimony as Christians shined differently in that time because, in fact, we saw more people come to Christ at businesses in that period than we did in any similar period before or since. Partly because, frankly, how you trust God, what you stand for, what you do when there is an existential threat shows you what you actually believe in. It's one thing to be #blessed when everything's great. But when it's not, that's when people actually begin to say, maybe you actually really do believe this Jesus stuff. But I think going into the phrase that became popular then was VUCA, right? This volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That's just a thing, and it's only ramping up. So I believe it's requiring of us as leaders to Gary Hamel, I believe, is the one who said 21st century innovation requires simultaneously being completely committed to a plan and having like resolve as a leader, and simultaneously being completely tentative should you get new information, which isn't about being schizophrenic, but is just like, we're going here this way, but should the world change, we may have to adapt and still go, still going there, but it'll look a little different. And I think that's just going to be the norm. Like, we don't know what the next war, rumor of war, technology, healthcare thing will do, but that's why the lesson through COVID is like, why are we here? What are we about? What's our mission? And let's not confuse the method with our mission, or the process with our mission, or the technology with our mission. If those things change situationally, we still know where we're going. Now, if you don't know that, then when the world changes and shakes the etch-a-sketch of the methods or the route, then you get lost.
For those people listening that are Christians, do you think there's your team saw you perhaps pray more during that season, or at least equally as much, certainly not less. Do you think there's value in your team knowing, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I've got a trust, an unshakable trust in a God that does. Yeah. And he may not reveal the exact details of the destination, but I know he's got our best interest at heart. Do you think that conveys something to even unbelieving team members?
Yeah, there's a CEO who I saw he did this on his like iPhone and texted to his team because things rolled down, that I was like, man, I wish I would have said as well as he did. Robert Barker is a CEO at North Carolina, run a big manufacturing company, and April timeframe, 2020, employees are sent home, customer orders are being canceled. They're watching like the AR go up, and it just everything's going red. And he seemed calm. And so one of his leaders said, "Hey, Robert, the staff are wondering like, why are you so calm? What do you know? Do you feel like you're invincible, or like you know some secret insider information?" And she recorded this simple video message to his team and said, "Hey, everybody, I don't know much more than you do. I have no idea what's going to happen next week. I could get COVID. My family could get COVID. I have the same risks you do. I don't know what will happen to our business, how long we'll be without customers or sales or the ability to deliver orders." He's like, all those things I don't know. I could lose my house. We have cash reserves of business. We didn't plan for this kind of event. This could dramatically shape our business. The reason I'm calm is not because I know what's happening and I have no worries, but it's because I trust a God who's sovereign over all those things and what he's promised me, and that my life in him is secure and that he is good. And the only thing at risk is my plans and my understanding. And so he really testified to his faith that was giving him peace that made no sense
Mm-hmm.
in a situation that made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made it so believable. And people went, how about you seem calm? He's like, well, I'm like, as a father, I'm worried about my kids. And as a husband, I'm worried for my ability to provide. As a CEO, I'm worried about will I be able to keep jobs and deliver all this. But my hope is not in those things. And so he had genuine hope and peace.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I think the gift of crisis is to reveal that. And I know in personal times of severe crisis, medically and otherwise in my life, I look back on those as actually being high times because it's where I most, like God met me
Mm-hmm.
and I most knew his reality. So I think that's the gift of those crises.
Yeah, the scripture that says a peace that passes understanding.
100%.
Is beyond our ability to even comprehend.
That's right.
Why am I peaceful in the storm?
Mm-hmm.
And it is a true gift when we get to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
Any final thoughts on this?
Yeah. Someone had given me a little book that I was just talking to my team about even more recently, because now I've got a bunch of team members who weren't there through that. They've heard the legends, the lore of 2020. And they're like, you have no idea what it was like then and how good things are now. But that idea that in the beginning God created, and he created us in his image, and thus we are made in the likeness of God and called to be given this first commission duty of bringing order to the world and subduing the earth. And in that means we're called to be creative, and not just creative, but creators. And I think whether you face a pandemic, and I hope we don't have that level of thing, but whether it's a legal dispute, a technology disruption, a regulatory change, a micro pandemic for you, in that moment, you've really got like minutes, maybe hours, but not days to decide, am I going to choose a victim mindset where I'm just, oh my gosh, the world's against me, it's all ending, and go into a bunker of just trying to survive, or to stand up in the moment and say, no, I'm called to be a creator in God. What's my role in this? How do I bring order into the storm? What are you doing? And play offense, not defense. Getting my team and making sure I, as myself, never lose that, I think is one of the key leadership like muscles to grow, to be part of good stories like that.
That's great. Mike, I appreciate your time.
Likewise.
Thanks for the words of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we'll have you back for another episode.
Look forward to it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.